Welcome to the Kubernetes SIG Apps for Monday, November 12th, 2018. All right, into chat here. I'll go ahead and share the agenda. My name is Matt. I will be your chair today. We don't have any announcements. One of the things we do have, very first up, is a demo. And Dan, I think that's you that's on. Are you there?
Yeah, hi.
So we normally start off with a demo here, and so the floor is yours if you'd like to demo for us.
Yes, I'd love to. Let me start sharing my screen and figure out how to do that. Okay.
Have you done this in Zoom before?
Yes, but yeah, I have. So hi, can everybody see my screen now?
We sure can. We see your desktop.
Great, perfect. So hi, my name's Dan. I'm demoing a tool called Tilt, and it's what's running in my terminal right now. And it has a bunch of names here. These are different things running in Kubernetes. We call them services, but they include deployments, and they're running in Docker for Mac on my local machine. And the idea here is that as you develop code that runs in Kubernetes in production, Tilt gives you a local instance. And so I can show you here, I can select through the different ones, and I'm going to open the front end, by hitting B, which is here on localhost. And you can see that I have, this is like our demo app. It's one of those things that was popular in the mid 2000s, a personalized homepage. And so each of these different widgets is served by a different microservice, just to illustrate that we're about microservice development. And so you can see here that I have a service for doggos and a service for snack selector. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the snack service, and I'm going to change what it selects to say, hi, SIG Apps, and I'm going to remember how to capitalize it. And when I save, you see Tilt sees the edit, it's doing a build, and now it's deploying, and you can see the container creating. And when I reload the page, you see hi, SIG Apps. And so the goal here of Tilt is that you have a personal instance that matches what's on your file system. And Tilt keeps that up to date. But the thing that we think is even more useful is that it's easy to mess up. And when you're doing microservice development, there's lots of different ways that things can go wrong. So here I'm going to add this error that should cause a crash loop. And so when I save it and edit, you can see that, oh, hey, I thought this was going to cause an error at runtime, but actually I forgot to import the code. And so we see the build error. If I go and I fix that build error, then hopefully this time the build will finish, but it will go into crash loop. And you can see that we can see the output. And so this is one of those things where oftentimes I've had to play 20 questions with kubectl to figure out what's breaking. And so Tilt takes all of the errors and puts them in one pane of glass in the same way, so you don't have to. If I instead change it to die not at startup, but at request time, then we're going to see it go green because it can start up. And then hopefully when I go in and reload, we'll see that, whoops, hey, I can see that same log message. And so that's my 4-minute demo of Tilt, because I wasn't sure what how demos normally went. So I guess I'm going to take a pause for questions, or I can show you different kinds of errors that we show in the same way. What would be most useful to this venue? If I mess up my YAML, it shows up in the same way.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to just keep walking through some of these,
Great.
you probably could go for another 5 or 10 minutes if you want, with questions and discussions or other things you want to show about it. That wouldn't be
Yeah.
a problem.
So the next thing I'll show is how to set this up. If instead of configuring with YAML, which has all of these issues in that, oh, how do you specify for loops or if statements? You configure tilt with, it's a dialect of Python. We're using the Starlark library, which is like a minimal Python interpreter, as a Go library. And so here to set it up, you say, hey, I have my snack service. It has some YAML, and it builds with this Docker file, and I want to port forward it to 9002. And so this is something where it doesn't fit in the Kubernetes YAML because it's not about what's happening in the cluster. It's about what's happening on your local machine. And you can set all of these up in this simple declarative ish way. But for instance, we don't use customize or case on net. We use M4, which is this old Unix templating engine. And we didn't have to like extend the tool to do this. This is done in our configuration by just, you can run local commands as part of the flow. And so we're able to take workflows that don't conform exactly to how the tool thinks of it, because you have this programmability to, so it's not just hard-coded configuration, but actually something you can play with and edit. Yeah, and so, oh, I'm going to go fix this error just because it's kind of there and distracting me. And so now I can see when it's ready. When it's all green, I restart it, and here we go. So if you have code that has microservices and you're editing multiple of them, Tilt gives you a personal instance end to end. It keeps that up to date without you having to think about it. It's just a dial tone that's happening in the background. And when something's wrong, it takes that and pins it in front of you instead of you having to go hunt for it. And so if you're running microservices in Kubernetes in production, we think that using Tilt for your local iterative development is going to be a big step up in usability. If you can go to windmill.engineering, that's our homepage. You can see it has a little demo mode and there's a video, and then we're down on, we're open source on GitHub, and it's easy to set up. If you have your YAML files and your Docker files, it should be about 5 or 10 minutes to start seeing it working, and we'd love to help set you up. We're on Twitter as twitter.com/windmilleng, and I'm on Twitter as as @dbentley. And I think that's most of what I came here to say.
Thank you. Who has any questions about this? Does anyone have questions?
I did. This is Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hey, I noticed that it looks like it's pushing to GCR. Is there a way to do it so that, say you have a larger Docker image, that it's not pushing out to the internet and it's going just to say like your local cluster instead?
Yes, so it needs an image tag, but so when Tilt starts up, it just looks at what your Kubernetes config is pointed at. And so if it's pointed to Docker for Mac or Minikube, it skips the push, but it still needs that image name. I forget exact reference what it's called in Docker lore. So it isn't pushing. Yeah.
So how do you get it? How do you get it into, say, like Minikube? Are you using the Minikube's Docker environment and sending it there, or?
Yeah, we're sending it to the local Docker, and then I forget exactly how. I tend to use Docker for Mac more than Minikube, but
Yeah.
I think by default Minikube can talk to your local Docker daemon to try and pull images.
Oh, cool! I'm gonna have to try that out.
But
That's really neat.
yeah, there's code in here that I didn't write. We're a 6-person startup based in New York, and so there's definitely code to figure out from your YAML how to change it to tell it, when to pull or when not to pull based on what kind of Kubernetes it is. So out of the box, there's logic to make it work well. And we can also, I didn't talk much, but we can also, we have a lot of logic that can actually run the builds in the cluster on the node where it's running. So if you configure it with, give us a little more detail, when you're editing code, for instance, our front-end binary links in all of the Kubernetes client libraries, which means doing a Docker build from scratch, the Go build takes a minute, but we actually use the previous cache. So Tilt keeps that around and injects it when you save. So you have iterative builds like you have outside Docker, so that there's no, we need you to not have a reason to stop doing this. We see so many people come up with escape hatches that then lead them into trouble and waste their time because their specific hacks and are kind of half-assed, and we're putting our whole ass into this so that you can save your time and focus on what actually matters to you and your team.
Well, this is really neat. Thanks for demoing it. I'm gonna have to try this out.
Great, yeah, and for anyone else, yeah, please, we can, if you reach out to me, we'd love to find time to, pair with you to get it set up, because this is what we're up to, or we can, set up a shared Slack channel. So if you're interested in this and having onboarding problems, we're on call for this. Cool.
Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, no, fantastic, thank you. If anybody has questions, please feel free, I guess, to reach out to Dan and ask them. I did have questions along the way, but you answered them for me. So thanks. It was a good demo. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. All right, now we're on to the discussion topics, and we have some discussion topics. And the first one is actually kind of a SIG Apps logistics one. Monday, I want to say it's the 26th. It's the Monday after Thanksgiving in the United States. The question is, should we cancel that? And we're asking because that means a short week. We'll have a meeting on Monday, then we'll have Tuesday, Wednesday, and then many folks are going to have all the days from there on out off until we come around to the next SIG Apps meeting. And will we have content? Are folks interested, or should we cancel that? Do we have any opinions? I hear nothing. I hear nothing. Do we think we'll have things to talk about on the 26th? Okay. So Ken and Adnan, I hear you're both here. I'm not going to be around and doing anything in that time period, which probably means the service definitions and application CRD and some of the other stuff won't get. Will either of you being around doing much with? You're both muted, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It sounds like we might want to cancel that one. I mean, I'll be here, but yeah, I have no burning need to have it the Monday after Thanksgiving or to cancel it. So really up to the SIG.
Yeah, I'll be around as well, so same really. We might want to take it to the mailing list.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. All right, I'm actually going to bump up. We have a developer tools discussion typically here, but I wanted to actually discuss the KEP beforehand. So we have a proposal out for portal. I named it. I gave it a very businessy name: Portable Service Definitions. Let me share my screen, and it's an idea that we've been working around, and we want feedback on. All right. Folks, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. It's called Portable Service Definitions. Right now it's being written over in HackMD before it goes up for a pull request. But if this sounds good to folks, then we'll look at doing it either later today or tomorrow, turning it into a pull request. And the goal is, okay, so simple goal. I want to go deploy something into Azure and GKE and AWS, and we'll say Docker for Mac, and it's going to be my little application, for example, just say WordPress, and it's going to use MySQL as a database, right? And I don't want to maintain the database myself. I want to use a SaaS. And so I want to just say, give it to me, and I want to be able to ask for it in all the environments and then get back the credentials in a consistent manner everywhere. So then everything just works, right? I get the full round trip. I get a secret, I get the credentials, everything starts up, my application's able to get it. Doesn't matter what environment I'm trying to go into. And that's kind of the motivation behind it. How do we get application portability when we have to deal with services? Right now, Kubernetes gives us application portability for things we have to deploy into Kubernetes, but then there are lots of common services, and databases are a really simple one, DNS, and there are a number of others that can be labeled in the same light that are common services. Now, it doesn't fit everything. So the goals here, right, are to do the portability, to provide a common way to request a service, obtain credentials, detect which services are even available to you. How do you find out what services are even available to you in the clusters you're going to deploy into? And how do you get it to work with the major public clouds? Now, a non-goal, you can't provide an out-of-the-box solution for every bespoke service, and there are more and more and more of them these days. It's probably only going to work for lots of common services. But when folks have radically different APIs and feature details in their stuff, there's no way to provide commonality across that because there just isn't commonality. And of course, we don't want to replace the Kubernetes service catalog. This may work with it. It all depends on where things are going to go. It's focused very much on the application operator experience of being able to deploy into multiple environments, which is why we're interested in this. By the way, at the beginning of it, you can notice that this is all the metadata on it. We did put service catalog down as a participating SIG, and we're going to ask the chairs over there to be reviewers because we do want to work well with this because we're stepping into a similar space. I did outline 2 user stories. One is you can query and see what services are available using a Kubernetes native API, something like kube control, get CRDs, right? And you can see what they are. And then another one is you can declaratively request an instance of a service with a custom resource, and then you can get that secret back in a common way across everything. And so the implementation details here, along with a little bit of plan, are to start with something simple. You'll see MySQL and Postgres there, and DNS are options. But you have a common resource that you can request in every environment. And then you also, if optionally, there are credentials that need to come back for it, whatever those are, those come back in a secret that instead of its type being opaque, it's spec'd out. And we have a common CRD and then a common secret to get information that closes the loop for the different environments. And it's an interface to be able to request and get details back in a common way across providers. The plan here is, in the last one, is to work out details, is to start with one service and then to work with and try and get it to work with, say, Kubernetes locally. Maybe it's a controller that deploys Helm or just deploys resources just as a proof of concept. And then you have something work with SaaSes across the 3 main public clouds, the 3 by adoption. Others are included, but I just happen to know that we actually know how to do this for the major public clouds as far as the logistics are concerned. Once we get past that, we'll need more help. But that's kind of the idea, is to prove it out for MySQL and then start rolling it on for other services to see what we can do to try and prove it out. That's kind of the concept behind it. It's all about closing the whole loop across the board. And this is going to be hard. So the risks that I've noted, and if folks have other risks, are the access controls and relationships around accounts and services. How do we do this with tenancy and things like that? And then, of course, the details when you get into some of these about requesting size and features on them. How do we handle those kinds of things? And how do we commonize that kind of detail? Those are kind of 2 of the risks. I don't have mitigations for those yet. For the graduation criteria, I said a certain number of organizations have to have adopted this. We have to have at least 3 services that are created and in use. And of course, we've got to document both using this to go create controllers, because controller is part of this as well. So one of the details that I guess I didn't share yet was you get the custom resources, and then you have controllers. And those controllers can be different in every environment as long as your resource is the same and your secret coming back is the same. How it's implemented on the backside can be different. So you could have an AWS controller, an Azure controller, a Google Cloud controller, an IBM Cloud controller, an Oracle Cloud controller, a controller for Docker for Mac and Minikube. We could have a variety of controllers, but as long as they implement the same interface, that's fine. And that's a way to get across environments, right? And so we want to have documentation for how to actually use this to create controllers and what you've got to do. And then, of course, service consumer documentation on how do you use this if you're going to go create things. And so that's the idea. The alternative here is listed out as actually modifying the service catalog to have more of this functionality, which, as I understand it, is going to be really, really hard. And so having a separate component is probably the easier way to go. In addition to that, the service catalog is tightly coupled to the open service broker. And while that will work great in some environments that have very mature open service brokers, some things like in Docker for Mac, there may be a simpler, more direct solution. I don't know, but there might be. And you're open to the option of doing that behind this. And it's kind of we're trying to be complementary to the open service broker, more on experience than some of the other details. And so that's the proposal here. Do folks have any questions or thoughts or any of that stuff on it?
I have a demo that shows this in action as like a proof of concept if anyone's interested.
I am. So if you would like, I will stop sharing and you can go ahead and share.
Cool. Okay. All right. I was calling the proof of concept cloud kinds just because what I was really focusing on was being able to have a resource that was specific to the type of SaaS that you were creating here. So if I looked at, for example, a MySQL, that's kind of like the canonical example here. I want to be able to do this and say kind MySQL. And I wanted to give it a very brief amount of information that, as you were saying, is not tied to any specific backend provider. Like nothing here says Azure or Minikube or anything like that. And then I want to be able to pass in some extra information potentially. Like I really cared, like in this case, that the database was called WordPress, or I was doing some stuff here to make things work. And so what this looks like for the prototype is I have a main controller that understands how to watch for a dynamic set of kinds. It doesn't use like a typed client set like you're usually not used to seeing. It takes advantage of the new dynamic informers and dynamic client sets that are in, I think it's called controller runtime in upstream Kubernetes. And so what I can do is, if I do kubectl get cloud providers, ignore all my names. I just was picking stuff to make a demo here. So I have Service Catalog set up as a backend provider that understands how to provision things for me. And I could have other ones, maybe for the AWS operator, for example. So if we take a look at this, it says that the Service Catalog provider understands MySQL. This is just for the demo, but Service Catalog can actually handle pretty much anything. So this could be dynamically updated by Service Catalog itself and list out everything it has in its catalog. And then it also defines a little webhook. And the main controller for Cloud Kinds watches for, say, MySQL. And when it gets a new MySQL resource created, a CRD, it goes, oh, hey, I'm going to kick off this webhook and tell it you need to do your thing. So what this ends up looking like, so if I do, just looking at Service Catalog for a second here, we don't have any instances running at the moment of any cloud services. And so I can apply that MySQL CRD. Life is not instant. Oh man, come on. So let's see, we got these. So if I do kubectl get all of my SQLs, I should see it was made. Let's take a look and see what's going on here. It was created, it's got all my values on there. Is my environment down? Oh no. I'm running this off of my personal laptop because I had massive computer problems this morning. So this may not be working. Oh, it should be working. Oh, okay. I just wasn't patient enough. Cool. Good to know that's what it was. So the flow that just happened right here is that there was that generic CRD, the MySQL CRD, right? The Cloud Kinds main controller noticed that it was there and then fired off the webhook for the provider that said it knew how to handle MySQL. In this case, it was Service Catalog, but it could have been anything. They don't have to be tied to any particular spec or anything like that. And in the webhook payload, it just says, hey, here's this CRD. You say you know how to handle it. Go do your thing. And so this adapter that I had here for Service Catalog essentially took that CRD and took the payload out of the spec, like these types of information, and turned that into a Service Catalog service instance. So I have a mini broker running on this machine. So if I do mini broker allows you to use Service Catalog on a mini cube cluster and have it essentially provision Helm charts for you. So that it's basically the OSV spec implemented on a local cluster for you. So if I do kubectl get pods, I should have a MySQL database here, yep, that I can use. So that's kind of the demo. My huge goal here is that, so I'm one of the chairs for Service Catalog, and I was the person who said that this isn't really a good idea to try to change Service Catalog. So our SIG is interested in doing a lot of really good UX changes, but unfortunately what we have is like tied completely to the open service broker spec, and the ecosystem didn't really adopt it, to be honest. The major cloud providers have brokers. Amazon has already decided, though, to invest more in operators. And there's other things out there that are cool that people could be making, like etcd operator, for example, that you'd want to be able to use, and you don't want to have to force everything into a spec that essentially wasn't, in my opinion, widely adopted, the OSB. So this is a way around that. And this just kind of shows the UX of what we could do. And it's cool because we'd actually maybe be able to get people to agree on what these common specs should look like and how the secrets should come out. Because like for Cube Apps, for example, this has always been a huge problem, that every provider gives your username, password, and connection info in different ways and things like that. So having a chance to start fresh and make a consistent experience should make this really pleasant for developers to work with. And that's all I have.
Thanks. So folks, what do y'all think of this? Is this a cap by anybody? See any tweaks to this cap before we move forward with it?
That was really cool. Can I ask / maybe suggest one thing?
Yes.
It seems like it might be more declarative if instead of creating it and then getting the, like having some way to get the credentials, would it make more sense to like include the credentials as part of the definition, like perhaps as a secret or a reference to a secret?
Maybe. Sometimes you'll want to do that and sometimes you won't. Some providers may or may not. That's one of the details we'll definitely need to work out. And sometimes you're not going to be able to get all of the credentials as passed in. For example, if you're going to say, give me MongoDB, or you're going to say, give me the MySQL connection string, you might be able to pass in a username and password, but you may not be able to pass in the DNS name for the location of it, right?
Oh, cool.
And so something you're going to need to get back from them, because that's just the way the SaaS providers work. You can't always pull that off by saying, give me this name that I want, because it's just not going to work. Now, for the database name like she showed off, you totally can. And you probably can for some of the things like usernames and passwords, but there's some things in there you can't. And we do need a common way to handle that. But I like your idea of being able to say, request it for some of those things you can request. That's something we'll have to work out.
That makes sense. That's a good motivating example, which would be great in the doc if you get to it. That looks good.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Hey, Matt, can you link the Pastebin into the group chat?
Sure. Let me find publish.
And also, there's a difference between coordinates and credentials. So
Yeah.
maybe credentials would be something that you might want to provide as part of the declarative specification. But I would think for most things that are to get turned up automatically for you, the coordinates of the service that you're going to get back, like the MySQL connect string or maybe just an IP address or a DNS name, depending on the type of thing that you're turning up. I think that might be something that would be injected by the cloud provider. Perhaps you could request particular coordinates, but I kind of think that maybe that's probably not the primary experience that's available today.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take some of this in and we'll go create a pull request for a new KEP to do this and get this moving.
Oh, Matt, I had one question. There were some UX things that I've been trying to put in Service Catalog that I'm giving up on, and I'd love to get them in here. And so I wanted to get your opinion on this.
Sure.
So for example, the MySQL case is pretty straightforward when you think about like deploying it on Minikube, but oftentimes they're like optional or even required configuration parameters that individual cloud providers need. And it's cool if the controller for, say, GKE, the controller for AWS or whatever, defaulted things in a useful way. But one of the things I've been working for with Service Catalog is allowing the cluster operator to say, here are the defaults I want to use on this cluster or in this namespace, because maybe they don't like the defaults for whatever. Maybe they want to add extra whitelisting of IPs or change how they do backups, all sorts of like things that you can do. And so I thought it'd be neat if, in addition to the CRD being able to say, here's all the extra little toggles I need, but also have a way to not say that, and then have the cluster operator, whoever the sysadmin is for that cluster, kind of step in and provide defaults that make sense for whatever environment they're running in, maybe like a shared development environment where everyone's needs to use tiny databases or things like that.
Oh, that's a neat idea. And so it's actually a separate set of CRDs that get launched with the controller that have to do with the operations of the controller itself and not the operations of the application.
Yes.
That makes sense. And if it's smart defaults and configurable defaults, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. So AWS or GKE could say, like, if you just tell me MySQL, I'll automatically fill in all the extra things you need and you'll get something.
Mhm.
But you could configure, say, the GKE controller or something to be a little more customized, whatever you're trying to do. And I don't know if that would belong in this KEP or if it would have to be a separate thing, because it's near and dear to my heart and it feels all very tied in together.
Well, it gets into the way the controllers are written for this.
Yeah.
I don't know if it fits into this KEP or if it's just an implementation detail of doing the KEP. I guess it would fit in here because it's trying to make them portable, and to be portable, it's about saying defaults. So I guess that fits in here. Yeah.
So there are a couple of things here, though. There's a lot of places in Kubernetes that you can have multiple, not multiple, but you can have diverse implementations. Storage is probably a good example. Like dynamic provisioners work differently for every cloud, and there's kind of a base set of parameters that you would probably want to have for MySQL, for instance, right? Like just general things that are probably configurable across the board. One of the issues is that for RDS versus, like, let's say Cloud SQL, that the set of things that you actually are allowed to configure might differ. So one question is, do you just have the minimum subset, basically the lowest common denominator that's available everywhere as explicit configuration parameters? Then there are going to be things that are cloud specific that you want to configure. And with most places in the system where you're touching an opaque cloud provider and you're still providing some overriding configuration, it's basically like a map string that you're allowed to pass in arbitrary parameters for your object that might be specific to the underlying implementation. So that would be one way to do it. But I think that would be a first step. And that's just figuring out how do you get parameters for each environment into the controller in a uniform way. And then what you were bringing up is defaulting those things to reasonable values. That's a whole nother level of customization that I think is valuable to have, but maybe we should figure out after we figure out the first two.
So what I was actually, and I think, Ken, I agree with this. The reason that I actually put in here that when we start off with something known like MySQL, and we have to do it across the 3 major cloud platforms, plus doing it in Kubernetes, that would force us to deal with the wide variety of those configurable parts and try to come up with a sane way to do something that we all know pretty well, and come up with some good patterns and thought processes on it. So I like coming up with what do you make configurable part of these, and then saying, okay, now after we've done that, is there a way we can make it simpler by passing in defaults in that? I think it's kind of just all layered into the same problem, but it's a next step. I like how you put it.
So if we submit this as a KEP, do you recommend that I suggest that as a comment on this, or do you think it should just be like, let's keep in mind for 2 months from now to circle back on that? I just want to make sure that we don't like push that off, and then we realize that because we did it from the beginning, it's harder to force people to all play.
So the way KEPs work,
support the same things.
Yeah, the way KEPs work is they are ongoing. So if this went in, it would go in as provisional.
Okay.
And then we would start working on it. It would not be implementable yet because we still have to go figure out all those little details by doing a bunch of the prototyping work and stuff around this.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually we'd figure those out and it would move to implementable, in which case, hopefully we've worked out enough and prototyped enough we could go to implemented. But this can evolve over time. Merging does not mean it's done. Merging means it's kind of been accepted, it's searchable, it's state. And so there are things like provisional, implementable, implemented. Those are the 3 we'd need to be concerned with. And if this went in, it would just be provisional. And then we got to go figure out how to make it implementable.
Okay, thanks for that context, because I've never even watched a KEP go through before. So yeah.
So yeah, that's why it would go in. And what I would probably do is take that idea and put it in as another paragraph in the implementation detail section as what we're proposing to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Adnan pointed out in here, he could see it go down the route of ingress, where non-common configurations across platforms are set using annotations. I hadn't actually thought about that.
I'm not sure if that's the ideal case,
Yeah.
but I could certainly see that happening.
Yeah, there's a few different things we can do. But I can start carrying this to the next step. Carolyn, if you actually want to write this as another paragraph on this and then ping me when it's done, you can put your thoughts on the defaults, then I'm happy to put it in.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. All right. So that's where I wanted to go with this. Did anybody have any other final comments on it? Fantastic. All right. So the last thing we have is we alternate between developer tool discussions and workloads API discussions. Do we have any other developer specific, tool specific discussions we should have? Okay, open discussion time. We've got about 14 minutes left. Did anybody have any other open discussion topics? Anything they wanted to discuss? Fantastic. Everybody gets 14 minutes left. Thanks for the time, and this will be posted online to YouTube here in the near future. Thanks everyone for coming and for the taking a look at this stuff. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too.
See y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.